So why do we need React Suspense? Well, if you have a React app and you want to fetch some data, there are a couple of ways you can do that. The typical one is a fetch and render. You have some kind of use effect that fetches data and then you update your component. In this case, if you have a parent component and a child component, you render the parent component first, then you have the use effect fetch the data, and after that is completed, you render the next component, the child component, and you fetch the data for the child component. In a more complicated app tree, this can take quite a bit of time, and it's not the most pleasant experience because you have to wait for the one thing to finish before you can get to the next one. The alternative is a fetch then render method. You can do that client side, but I think the modern way is doing it more the server side, also called server-side rendering. The idea is that you fetch all the data and then you render the component. The problem here is that it can take quite a bit of time if you have a slow API. Like if you have an API that takes like 2 seconds, the user navigates to that page, he doesn't really get any feedback. Like the page looks like it's frozen, but the user doesn't know that the page is actually fetching the data. Now, if you have React Suspense, you fetch your data early and you have some kind of fallback UI. The benefit is that the user actually sees the page that he can interact with, and after the fetching is complete, the fallback UI gets replaced with the real component in the data. Now, in this case, I want to show you the example with Next.js. Now, if I go to my fetch and render example, you can see there's some kind of loading indicator, meaning that the parent component loads the data first with the use effect, and after that is finished, the child component can actually start rendering and fetching the data. If you look at the SSR example, I click on the button and it takes a bit of time. Like here it takes 2 seconds, and then it renders the component. Like you don't really get any feedback as a user, and it seems like it's frozen, like it's not really a pleasant experience. Now, if you have React Suspense, you get immediate feedback, you see some kind of page that you can interact with, you saw the loading indicators, and after the data is fetched, the indicators get replaced with the real component and the data. And also you can see here that all the fetching is done asynchronously. It's done in parallel. It's not blocking as the fetch and render example. It's, everything starts at the same time. In this case, I've implemented 2 versions. One with React Server components, which is like a more modern approach, and the Suspense with client-side rendering. So basically, Suspense with the use effect method, right? The cool thing with server rendering, not just server-side rendering, but also React Server components, is that the calls are cached. So, for example, the SSR example took 2 seconds to load the page. Now, if I go back, it's immediate because it's been cached. If I go back to the first example with fetch and render, it still takes the same time, right? There's like no cache on the client. Now, if we go back to the Suspense example, you can see that this server component already has the data because React Server components also have a cache in them.